In the far-flung hills of Madeira, Portugal, on a narrow street where laundry danced between crooked buildings and the ocean wind whispered through old windows, a boy was already chasing a dream the world wasn't ready for. Cristiano Ronaldo dos Santos Aveiro wasn't born to fame or fortune. His father worked as a kit man at a local football club and struggled with alcohol. His mother cleaned houses to feed 4 children. They lived in a modest home, and some nights, they shared food because there simply wasn't enough. But Ronaldo had something that didn't need money or status to shine: hunger. Not for food, though that was sometimes real, but a deeper hunger, something burning in his bones. It was the need to be more. While most kids his age were playing marbles or skipping stones in the river, Ronaldo would be racing up steep hills in flip-flops, sweating through his shirt, his eyes locked on the invisible goal only he could see. He didn't have a proper ball. Often it was a bundle of socks, or a half-deflated one patched together with tape. The pitch was gravel, the goalposts were rocks. But to him, it was the World Cup final. He played until his feet blistered and bled. His mother worried constantly. "Cristiano, you'll hurt yourself," she'd say. He'd only smile and reply, "I need to get better, Mama. I have to." His family didn't doubt his passion, but even they couldn't imagine how far it would take him, or how far he'd have to go to prove himself. At just 12 years old, Ronaldo left home for Lisbon, a place where everything was unfamiliar. His accent made him stand out. His background made him feel small. He arrived with a suitcase of second-hand clothes and one pair of worn-out cleats. Other boys at the academy were from big cities, polished and confident. Ronaldo was shy, skinny, and clearly from somewhere else. They mocked his accent, calling him "island boy," and laughed when he mispronounced words. He ate alone, trained alone, and cried into his pillow at night. His tears weren't weakness, they were a kind of armor. He was young, but he had already learned, if they laugh at your dream, it probably means you're dreaming big enough. On the pitch, though, he was electric. His feet danced with precision that didn't belong to a child. Coaches noticed the skill, but they were skeptical. Some thought he was too emotional. One even said, "He's talented, but too intense. He won't last." Jealous teammates refused to pass him the ball. Some even tried to trip him during drills. Once, before a trial game, he found his cleats soaked in water, sabotaged. He wore wet boots and still scored twice. But what hurt more than any kick was the isolation. He was fighting to belong while being treated like a problem. At night, he would sneak out of his bunk, go to the field alone, and train under the moonlight. Not because someone told him to, but because greatness was his only way out. Not just out of poverty, but out of being invisible. He wasn't chasing fame. He was running from the feeling of being treated like trash. He told himself, "One day, they will respect my name." What he didn't know was that destiny had plans even he couldn't imagine, and that far away, another boy was walking a parallel path, a boy who would one day change everything. Ronaldo's early days in Lisbon were not just difficult, they were soul-crushing. The glamour people associate with football academies didn't exist in his world. While the facilities were better than what he had back home, the environment was colder, harsher, and lonelier. He was just a 12-year-old boy trying to act like a man. And the more he tried, the more resistance he met. He would wake up before the sun, lacing up his damp boots, still soaked from the night before, and head to the pitch before anyone else arrived. He didn't do it for praise. In fact, no one noticed. Or if they did, they mocked him for trying too hard. One boy once threw a towel at him in the locker room and said, "You think this will make you famous? You'll be back in Madeira before winter." The coaches weren't much kinder. While some recognized his raw talent, others focused only on his flaws. "He needs to toughen up," one said. "Too dramatic. Too sensitive. Cries too easily." But what they didn't see was what caused those tears. He missed his mother's cooking. He missed his friends. He missed hearing someone speak in his accent without laughing. Every night he stared at the ceiling in the dark, questioning if his sacrifices were worth it. But something inside him refused to quit. He began pushing himself harder than ever. After training, when others were resting or playing video games, Ronaldo stayed behind. He'd practice free kicks against the wall, over and over. Shadows stretched long across the empty pitch as the sun disappeared, but he stayed. Alone with the ball, perfecting every touch, every turn. His obsession wasn't to prove them wrong, it was to prove to himself that he was different. That he could be someone. The isolation never went away. If anything, it got worse as his skills improved. Jealousy is quiet, but its actions are loud. There was a match coming up, an important one. Scouts would be watching. It was Ronaldo's chance. He felt it in his gut. But when he opened his locker that morning, his heart dropped. His boots were gone. In their place was a pair of mismatched shoes, clearly someone else's. Someone had stolen them. On purpose. It was a cruel message, you don't belong. But Ronaldo didn't complain. He didn't report it. He borrowed a teammate's backup pair, 2 sizes too small, and played anyway. He could barely run without pain, but that didn't stop him. That day, he scored a hat-trick. Not one coach mentioned the stolen boots. Not one player congratulated him after the match. He walked back to his room in silence, the pain in his feet only slightly stronger than the ache in his chest. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his calloused hands, the same ones he used to help his mother carry groceries back home. That night, he cried again, not because he was weak, but because he was exhausted. He had given everything. But still, he felt like nothing. And yet, he didn't stop. Because deep down, a voice kept whispering, if you quit now, you'll never know who you could have become. He didn't realize it yet, but his story was already being written. The world was about to know his name, but first, the world would try everything to break him. What he didn't expect was that somewhere in a different part of the world, someone who would one day become his greatest rival, and his greatest ally, was watching the same dream from a different kind of darkness. Fate has a strange way of intertwining lives, sometimes quietly, without the world noticing. By the time Cristiano Ronaldo was 15, he had already learned to wear his scars like armor. His skills were undeniable, he was fast, explosive, and unpredictable on the pitch, but off the field, he was still treated like a shadow. He had become used to the cold shoulders, the sneers masked as jokes, and the silence that followed even his greatest performances. There was a loneliness in his journey, and no matter how many goals he scored, it always followed him. Then came the invite, Portugal's youth team was heading to Spain for a friendly tournament. A handful of Europe's most promising young talents would be under the same roof. It was supposed to be a celebration of emerging stars, but for Ronaldo, it felt like another test. The flight to Spain was quiet for him. He sat alone, pressed against the window, watching the clouds drift by as the boys behind him joked and laughed among themselves, never once including him. Once they arrived, the tension grew. The Spanish squad had more polish, more flair, and far more support. They moved like a family. The Portuguese team, meanwhile, still treated Ronaldo like the outsider, the boy who cared too much, who worked too hard, who didn't know when to stop. The match was set for the evening under floodlights in a modest stadium surrounded by hills. Ronaldo stepped onto the pitch determined to prove himself again. He wasn't there for fun. He was there to make the earth remember his name. And he played like it. He weaved through defenders like wind cutting through trees, his every movement sharp and deliberate. He scored twice, assisted once, and yet when the whistle blew, his celebration was quiet. His teammates huddled together, but not around him. It was like he had played alone. Back in the changing room, as the boys laughed and swapped jerseys, Ronaldo sat quietly on the bench, unlacing his boots with the same silent intensity he always had. He thought maybe this was just how it would always be. But life was waiting to shift in the most unexpected way. Earlier that day, a Spanish official, an ex-player who had quietly watched Ronaldo's movements, had noticed something. Not just his talent, but the way he stood alone. The fire in his eyes, the chip on his shoulder. He had seen this before. He had seen it in another boy. And so, as a surprise, he had arranged for a special guest to meet the players after the match. That guest walked into the locker room quietly. No big entrance. No spotlight. Just a calm presence and a quiet voice. Lionel Messi. At 15, Messi was already a whisper on everyone's lips in Spain. A boy with a magic left foot, battling his own demons, growth hormone deficiencies, late nights of self-doubt, and a quietness that people mistook for fragility. But when he saw Ronaldo, something clicked. Their eyes met, not with rivalry, but with something deeper. Recognition. Messi walked past the crowd of Portuguese players who suddenly lit up in excitement. He walked straight toward the quiet boy on the bench, sitting alone. "You're fast," Messi said, his Spanish accent thick but friendly. Ronaldo blinked, caught off guard. "Thanks," he said awkwardly, not sure what else to say. "I saw you play. You don't stop moving," Messi added. "Like you're trying to outrun something." Ronaldo gave a slight, cautious smile. "Maybe I am." Messi sat down next to him. The two didn't say much for a while. They didn't need to. There was something about standing on opposite ends of the same pain that didn't require explanation. Both of them had been doubted. Both of them had cried in silence. Both of them had turned pain into purpose. "They don't always see it," Messi finally said. "They didn't with me. They said I was too small to survive football. Maybe they're right, but I'm still here." Ronaldo looked at him, something stirring behind his tired eyes. "They say I care too much." "Good," Messi said. "That's why you'll be more than them." That conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. But it planted something neither of them understood at the time, a quiet respect. A seed that would grow over the years, across leagues, across nations, across every headline that would try to pit them against each other. Back then, they were just two boys, barely teenagers, sitting in a quiet locker room in Spain. Both misfits in their own way. Both building empires from rejection. That night, Ronaldo didn't sleep much. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. Years passed like pages flipping in a story no one could put down. Cristiano Ronaldo had transformed from the overlooked island boy into one of football's brightest stars. Manchester United had taken a chance on him, and under Sir Alex Ferguson's guidance, Ronaldo bloomed with frightening speed. He dazzled with stepovers, broke ankles with turns, and left defenders grasping at air. He was no longer just fast, he was fearless. But with the rise came a new kind of shadow. The media began to write him into a role he never asked for, the showman, the arrogant one, the one who played for the mirror. Fans cheered when he scored, but also booed when he failed. Every celebration was scrutinized. Every emotional reaction picked apart. Too much ego. Too flashy. He thinks he's bigger than the team. The headlines ran like wildfire. What the world didn't understand was that every flick, every spin, every sprint came from the same place as those lonely nights on the Lisbon training ground, pain, not pride. Meanwhile, in Barcelona, another story was unfolding. Lionel Messi had emerged as the calm genius of world football. A player who seemed to float across the pitch, untouchable, unshakable, all while wearing humility like a second skin. The world adored him, quiet, polite, loyal. The opposite of Ronaldo, or so they said. The comparisons grew louder. Messi is a gift. Ronaldo is a machine. Messi plays with his heart. Ronaldo plays for the spotlight. It was an endless war of words, one that neither of them had asked for. Ronaldo read the headlines and said nothing, but each one hit like a brick. He began to carry it all on his shoulders, the doubt, the love, the pressure, the expectations. And the more he rose, the more people waited to see him fall. Behind closed doors, the weight was heavy. There were nights he couldn't sleep, not because of the pressure of the game, but the pressure of perception. He could score a hat-trick and still wake up to a tabloid questioning his passion. He could donate thousands to children's hospitals and still be called vain for his hairstyle. The world had made its decision. Ronaldo was the villain. Messi was the saint. But what no one saw coming was that the so-called saint never played along with that narrative. During a post-match interview, when asked who his toughest opponent was, Messi paused, looked directly into the camera, and simply said, "Cristiano. Not Ronaldo. Not CR7. Cristiano." He didn't elaborate with dramatic flair. He didn't turn it into a soundbite. It was a moment of honesty, simple, sincere, and powerful. He doesn't give up, Messi added. That's what makes him different. When Ronaldo saw the clip days later, something shifted. He had expected another cold remark or a diplomatic dodge. Instead, he heard something raw. Real. The man he was endlessly compared to, his so-called rival, had offered him respect in a world that rarely did. He didn't tell anyone how he felt after seeing that clip. He didn't tweet about it. He didn't post a story. He just watched it again. And again. Not for ego, but for comfort. Because for the first time, someone on his level, someone who understood what it meant to live under a microscope, had acknowledged the fire behind his fight. From that moment on, things between them were never quite the same. They didn't talk often. Their paths didn't cross in long conversations or shared dinners. But whenever they faced each other on the pitch, there was a silent dialogue. A nod. A glance. A moment that told a deeper story, one that only two people in the world truly understood. It was a rivalry on the outside. But underneath, it was something more rare. It was empathy. It was recognition. It was the beginning of a quiet bond that would one day change the way the world saw both of them. The night was electric. The stage was set for one of the biggest spectacles in world football, a Champions League clash that felt more like a myth unfolding in real time. Real Madrid versus Barcelona. Ronaldo versus Messi. The world held its breath. The cameras zoomed in, the stadium buzzed like a living organism, and fans from every continent tuned in not just for goals, but for moments, those rare, history-making seconds that would be replayed for decades. Ronaldo stood in the tunnel, muscles tense, mind sharp, eyes forward. He had trained his entire life for these moments. Every insult, every early morning sprint, every cry into his pillow had led him here. On the other side of the tunnel, Messi adjusted his armband, calm as ever. His face gave away nothing, but he was just as focused. For years, people had debated who was better. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, greatness would speak for itself. The match exploded into life. Ronaldo was aggressive, lightning quick, constantly charging down the wing, cutting inside, taking shots from angles others wouldn't even attempt. Messi was the ghost in the machine, weaving between defenders like water slipping through fingers. The crowd didn't blink. The world didn't breathe. Then came the moment no one saw coming. It was in the second half. Ronaldo sprinted after a long ball, pushing his body as if it owed him more than it could give. He lunged. And then he collapsed. Silence. He clutched his leg, wincing, his face twisted in pain. The medical staff rushed over. The stadium, once deafening, was suddenly quiet, like the air had been sucked out of it. The commentators speculated. It could be a hamstring, a tear, this doesn't look good. And then, something happened that no one expected. Messi, who had the ball at his feet just seconds earlier, stopped. He looked at Ronaldo, lying on the ground, surrounded by medics. And without hesitation, he walked across the pitch toward him. The crowd noticed. The cameras turned. Messi knelt down beside Ronaldo and, to the confusion of fans and players alike, said something only the two of them could hear. "Don't listen to them," he whispered. "You're bigger than this game. You've always been." Ronaldo looked up, surprised, not because Messi had spoken, but because of what he had said. There was no rivalry in his voice. No sarcasm. Just sincerity. Concern. One of the medics tried to move Messi aside, but Ronaldo lightly raised his hand as if to say, "Let him stay." It was a strange, surreal image, two legends, two so-called rivals, side by side on the grass, one offering support, the other silently accepting it. Eventually, Ronaldo was helped off the pitch, his face a mix of frustration and pain. The game resumed. Barcelona went on to win. Messi scored a brilliant goal. But when the final whistle blew, that wasn't the moment people remembered. They remembered that moment. That stillness in the storm. That brief flicker of humanity in a sea of rivalry. When the world expected animosity but witnessed compassion instead. After the game, in the press conference, reporters asked Messi about it. "What did you say to him when he went down?" Messi smiled slightly. "That's between us. But sometimes, even warriors need to know someone sees their battle." Ronaldo didn't attend the post-match conference. He was being treated, wrapped in ice, re-evaluated. But someone showed him the clip of Messi kneeling beside him. He watched it twice. Not once did he smirk. Not once did he say a word. He just nodded. Slowly. Thoughtfully. Because in that moment, something shifted, not in his career, not in the public eye, but inside him. In the place that remembered how it felt to be the kid no one believed in. The kid who cried alone in Lisbon. He had faced injuries before. He had faced defeat before. But never had he faced a moment like that, where kindness came from the last person anyone expected. That night, when he finally left the stadium and stepped into the quiet of his hotel room, he sat at the edge of his bed and whispered something into the dark. "Thank you." Not to the doctors. Not to the fans. But to the one person who didn't need to say anything, yet said exactly what he needed to hear. The years moved on, faster than anyone expected, carrying with them trophies, goals, injuries, records, and the ever-growing roar of a world obsessed with comparison. Ronaldo had conquered Spain, risen to immortality in Madrid's white, and then, with the same unapologetic fire that had driven him since boyhood, moved on. Juventus. Manchester United again. Then Saudi Arabia. He became a symbol of unstoppable will. A figure carved in marble, chiseled, unbending, constantly under a microscope, constantly performing. And Messi, in his own world of quiet thunder, rewrote history with Barcelona. He stayed longer than anyone thought he would. He broke records with a whisper, not a roar. Then he too moved on, to Paris, and later, like a final chapter written under a golden sky, he carried Argentina to glory in the World Cup. The same boy once considered too small, too weak, too soft, now stood as a giant of the game. The media tried endlessly to keep the rivalry alive. They built headlines out of shadows and tension out of silence. But somewhere beyond the cameras, beyond the highlight reels, something far more profound had begun to settle between them. Not friendship, perhaps, but something even rarer in the world they lived in, understanding. One afternoon, long after the noise of another transfer season, a letter arrived for Ronaldo at his home. Hand-delivered. No publicist. No assistant. Just an envelope with his name, Cristiano, written in sharp, careful handwriting. He opened it, assuming it was from a fan. But as his eyes scanned the words, everything around him slowed. To the kid who cried alone on the training ground. I saw you long before the world did. I remember the boy they ignored, the one who ran when no one was watching. They gave me silence to grow, and they gave you fire. But both of us grew all the same. They wrote stories about us that we never asked for. They made us enemies, when we were really mirrors. I never hated you. I admired you. You made me better. Gracias, hermano. Lionel. Ronaldo didn't cry easily. Not anymore. He had spent years turning emotion into discipline. But as he sat alone with the letter in hand, a quiet stillness took over him. He read it again. Slowly. This wasn't a headline. This wasn't a media stunt. This wasn't for cameras or likes. It was one man's truth handed to another. And for Ronaldo, it meant more than any award. He stood up, walked across the room, and placed the letter in a silver frame. Not on a trophy shelf, not next to medals or golden boots, but in his private gym. Where he trained. Where he bled. Where he remembered the boy he used to be. Every time he hit a set, every time he pushed beyond exhaustion, he would glance at the wall and see those words. I saw you long before the world did. And in that moment, every insult faded. Every accusation of vanity, every story written to tear him down, every fan who ever screamed at him for a missed penalty, they all dissolved into something smaller than the truth he now held. He and Messi had been chasing the same dream. But instead of running alongside each other, the world had thrown them into opposite lanes. Yet even so, they had reached the finish line together, two different roads leading to the same summit. And at the top, there was no fight. No need to shout. Only respect. Silent. Immovable. Eternal. Time, as always, kept moving. The stadiums changed. The jerseys changed. The leagues and continents changed. But some names never faded. Ronaldo and Messi were no longer just footballers, they were legends. Monuments. Living history. Kids wore their names on their backs without ever having seen them in their prime. Commentators spoke of them like myth and scripture. The world still debated who was greater, but by now, both men had long stopped trying to answer that question. They had nothing left to prove, not to the world, and not to each other. And then came one last unexpected meeting. It was a sunny afternoon in Buenos Aires, the kind that glowed with golden light and carried the laughter of children in the air. A global youth football charity had brought together legends from around the world to inspire the next generation. Ronaldo had flown in quietly, away from the noise. No grand press conference, no dramatic entrance. Just him and his team, walking through the orphanage grounds where the event was held. Dozens of barefoot kids ran across the dirt field, playing with a ball that barely held together. But their smiles, wide and fierce, made it look like the World Cup final. He was watching one boy sprint across the dusty pitch, his shirt hanging off his shoulders, his shoes mismatched, when a soft, familiar voice spoke from behind him. Some things never change. Ronaldo turned and saw him, Messi. Dressed in a simple t-shirt, hands in his pockets, the same calm in his eyes that he'd had since the beginning. They hadn't seen each other face to face in a long time. Not like this. Not without the pressure of points, or goals, or national pride. For a moment, they just stood there. Two men with thousands of matches between them. Millions of fans. Billions of memories. And yet, in that moment, it was just them, Cristiano and Lionel. I thought you weren't coming, Ronaldo said, smiling faintly. I thought you wouldn't, Messi replied. And then they both laughed, not forced, not for cameras, but the real kind. The kind that says we made it. They stood side by side as the children gathered around. Some of them had never even seen Ronaldo play live. Others only knew Messi from highlight reels. But they stared like they were looking at gods who had stepped out of stories. The organizers handed them a ball and asked if they'd be willing to play with the kids for a few minutes. Ronaldo looked at Messi. You go first, he said. But Messi shook his head. No. You've always had the better warm-up. They smiled, walked onto the field, and started to play, not as rivals, not as icons, but as two men who had once been those kids, forgotten, doubted, dreaming. They passed. They dribbled. They let the kids tackle them. They lifted boys onto their shoulders after goals, celebrated wildly for every tiny victory. Laughter echoed across the grounds like music. After a while, the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of amber and violet. The organizers called the game off, but the children refused to let go. Ronaldo knelt beside one boy who reminded him of himself, dark-haired, intense eyes, a quiet kind of fire. He handed him the ball and said softly, "This is where I started too. Don't let them tell you who you can't be." Nearby, Messi watched and smiled. He could hear Ronaldo's words even without listening. Later, as they walked off the field together, one of the children tugged Messi's sleeve and asked, "Are you and Ronaldo friends now?" Messi paused. Looked at Ronaldo. Then crouched down beside the boy. "We were never enemies," he said. "We were just two kids chasing the same dream." Ronaldo nodded. As the crowd thinned and the stars began to appear overhead, Messi reached into his bag and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. He handed it to Ronaldo. "No more letters," Ronaldo said, half joking. Messi shrugged. "Just a photo this time. From that night in Spain. Us." The bench. Ronaldo opened it. And there it was, faded, grainy, but real. Two boys. A shared moment. The beginning of everything. He looked up and said, "Funny how they never saw this part of the story." "Maybe they weren't supposed to," Messi replied. They shook hands, no cameras, no flashing lights. Just a firm grip between two men who had spent their entire lives being compared, only to realize they had been walking together all along. As they parted ways that evening, the message left behind wasn't about goals or titles. It was about resilience. It was about humility. And most of all, it was about kindness, the kind that quietly shapes lives, builds legends, and reminds the world that beneath the jerseys and beyond the headlines, greatness is never just about winning. Sometimes, greatness is about knowing when to lift someone else. Even when the world expects you to compete. That's the story they'll never show in highlight reels. But it's the one worth remembering.